Welcome to the ADRA Insider podcast. Today we are joined by Elaria from ADRA Lebanon, and as always, I'm your host, Michael. And we're excited to have you, Elaria.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you very much, Michael, for having me here today.
Absolutely. So just a little bit of background. You're from here in Ontario originally?
Yes, I'm from Ontario, but I was born in Sudan.
Okay.
Yeah, we moved to Canada in 1993.
Okay.
So I've lived here since then. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
And now you work for ADRA Lebanon.
Yes, now I work for ADRA Lebanon.
How did you end up at ADRA Lebanon?
Actually, when I was here in Canada, I was interning with a local organization called Global Medic. Okay. And one of the donors or partners was ADRA Canada. Before that, I had never heard of ADRA. And then I was interning with them and I saw that how big ADRA was. So I was looking more to work with an organization that actually fulfilled its mission. So I started looking for positions with ADRA, and that's when someone had told me that, okay, ADRA Syria is looking for someone, ADRA Syria and ADRA Lebanon. So I emailed the country director and I asked them for what positions are available. So I looked online and there was a position for programs officer, etc. So I got an interview with them and they told me that actually they want me for ADRA Syria, not ADRA Lebanon. So I started with ADRA Syria, was there for 2 years. 2 years later, I was coming back to Canada and then they asked me, do you want to come to ADRA Lebanon as programs coordinator? And since 2019, I've been there until today.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you've got some experience in the Middle East there.
I do, and I speak Arabic, so it helps.
Okay, so that helps a lot.
Yes.
That helps a lot.
Yes.
Definitely an asset in that part of the world.
Exactly.
And so when you were working for ADRA Syria, you were working from Beirut, or were you working in Damascus?
I worked in Damascus.
Okay.
Yes.
You lived in Damascus.
I lived in Damascus. It was really such an experience to work.
I can imagine it would be.
During a civil war, yes, but I think that it helped prepare me for what's happening in Lebanon now.
Okay. And what's happening in Lebanon right now? There's been a lot that has happened in Lebanon recently.
Yes.
Most famous would be the explosion, I would say. And if I recall hearing correctly, you were in the country when that happened?
Correct.
On the way to the airport, was it?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So did you witnessed it then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to just
Sure.
talk about that a little bit?
Okay. So the day of the explosion, I was finishing up work and then I was on my way to the airport. The airport is only a few kilometers away from the Beirut port. And as I got to the airport, I saw several people crying, panicking, yelling. Some were calling their family, some were calling their friends, checking up on them. And I had no idea what was going on. I asked the taxi driver, I'm like, what's going on? He also didn't know. Even though we were so close to the port, we hadn't heard anything. Wow. But as soon as I got to the airport, I just saw this big smoke engulfing all of Beirut. And it was red. And so I started to get scared. Some people were saying it was a terrorist attack. Others were saying, no, it was a big fire. So I started calling my colleagues. No one was answering. Couldn't get a hold of them. Finally, someone was just like, it's okay, it's just a small fire at a warehouse. And this was exactly at 6:07 p.m., which was the time that the explosion happened. So I started to panic less. I went into the airport and still tried to communicate with my colleagues. The ones that were still at the office, they weren't answering. Then I started getting phone calls from my friends and family here in Canada. And they were asking me if I'm okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so I still was confused of what's happening because people at the airport are panicking. There was glass that was broken. And I'm lost as to what is happening. Then I go on Instagram and that's when I saw videos of the explosion.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it was so big and it was terrifying that I didn't even want to travel because I was so scared that something was going to happen to the plane because again we didn't know what was happening. So in my head I'm still thinking, okay, maybe it was a terrorist attack, maybe it was a bomb, since Lebanon has that history. Mm-hmm. So I had no choice because I was talking to the security guards there and they're just like, don't worry, it's nothing, you can still fly. So I'm like, okay. And I was coming home to Canada. So I said, okay, I'll get on.
Yeah.
But I was still scared because
Right.
everyone on the flight was panicking and they were crying, and I just didn't know how to react. And this is the first time that I've ever experienced something like this. But then I came.
But so you came back to Canada,
Yeah.
and you were home for a few weeks, and then went back, or?
Yeah, I was home for maybe like a month.
Okay.
Yeah, and then when I went back, it was as if I entered a new country because
Okay.
everything was broken. Our office actually had collapsed as well. So the roof, the windows were all broken. The whole city was really dark because I think that like a lot of people lost their family and friends. They lost their homes. They had never experienced anything like this. Like, people would even, like the Lebanese people would even tell you that this was worse than the civil war.
Wow.
Yeah, because it went away and like everything had gone in 1 minute.
Right.
From like 6:06 to 6:07, everything was gone.
Oh.
Yeah, so...
And this like exacerbated problems that were starting to surface in the country,
Correct.
did it not?
Yeah, so Lebanon had already been suffering from the coronavirus pandemic and the economic crisis, which started in October 2019. So the explosion just made everything worse. People who couldn't survive, they couldn't like reach their like basic necessities, now even lost their home. Almost 300,000 people went homeless in Beirut. And Beirut is a very small city. The population is probably 1 million or even less.
Right.
So 300,000 of those had lost their homes.
Yeah, that's a huge number
Yeah.
for such a small city.
Yeah, all of Lebanon alone is 6 million.
Right.
And 2 million of them are refugees. So they were already suffering from what was happening, and the explosion just added to it.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you said 2 million people in the population of 6 million are refugees.
Correct.
And I remember that was something that we had talked about before COVID and before the explosion. Something because ADRA has had projects. ADRA Canada has been working with ADRA Lebanon for a number of years now.
Yes.
With refugees that were in the country. I believe we helped with education, and we've also been helping with the Syrian refugees.
Yes.
Do you want to just talk a little bit about our projects that we've had in there in the past?
Of course, yeah. So ADRA Canada, just like you said, has been helping with ADRA Lebanon, and especially in the education sector. I think that the most thing that was threatening Syrian refugees in Lebanon was education, because they either could not afford to go to school or because the curriculum is different than what they had experienced in Syria. The curriculum in Lebanon is in French, whereas in Syria they only speak Arabic. So going to a completely new different country and with a new language, it was hard for them to keep up. So ADRA Canada's involvement was in our learning centers, which is in Mount Lebanon, very close to Beirut. And they supported in making sure that with a retention support program. So this is for children who are 6 to 14 years old. And the Syrian refugees, so they come to our learning center in the morning. Of course, this was before COVID.
But yeah.
Yeah, they come to the center in the morning, and we have tutors who will help them. They'll help them with their French, they'll help them with math and science and Arabic, and making sure that these children don't drop out.
Okay.
Because you'll see that a lot of Syrian refugees, because they can't keep up with school, the parents will withdraw them and put them into like maybe working at a gas station or working in a mechanic shop, anything that can help bring that some income into that family. Whereas like girls at like 13 years old, they'll get married.
Right.
So we have this big issue in Lebanon, and the project that ADRA Canada was supporting was making sure that these children stay in school. We also have the other education component, which is for the early childhood education program, also for Syrian refugees. It's to help all kids from 3 to 5 years old with a early childhood program that can help them enroll into school. So this prepares them with also French, math, science, and Arabic. That way, that we know that they'll definitely go into school.
Okay.
Within the education, we don't only reach children, but we reach their parents and the community. We do different activities with the parents, especially on awareness of the educational rights for children, on their knowledge on how early marriage can really affect a young girl, and also child labor. So we want to make sure that these things don't happen. So we do these programs with the parents and the surrounding community.
Okay. So how did COVID affect these programs? Were these programs still running when COVID started?
They were still running, but then what happened is that kids now were having to do it remotely.
Okay.
What we do is we'll record the videos and we'll send it to the families, the parents with their cell phones, and the child will watch it on the cell phone. Of course, it's not as effective as being in person with the child, especially since you're trying to help the child keep up with school. This COVID was another component that added to the child falling behind in school.
Right. So just one thing after another, and
Exactly.
then the explosion in August.
And then the explosion. So with the explosion in August, we had many families who stopped bringing their kids to school.
Okay.
Because either they went homeless, or they had left Lebanon, or they maybe moved from Beirut. So we also saw that there was a drop in like a dropout for many of our students.
Right.
But also then we started targeting children from Beirut when before it was closer to our center, because families don't have the money to pay for transportation or don't have a car to come all the way to our learning center.
Right.
So we started seeing that there was an increase in people coming from Beirut, but there was a dropout also at the same time.
Okay, so there was high turnover right around
Yes.
that time. Okay, and then so this kind of, at least in ADRA Canada's perspective, we had always been focused on education, but then the explosion happened and we became very focused on emergency response.
Exactly.
So can you tell a little bit about like how ADRA Lebanon was working post-explosion?
Immediately after the explosion, all the ADRA network offices, they gathered together to raise money for what happened in Lebanon. It was actually amazing how fast they were able to do it. Within days, they raised enough money to distribute cash assistance to the families who lost their homes, in order for them to repair their homes or to buy something that maybe they have lost. For example, it could be a refrigerator or an oven. ADRA Canada being one of those offices. But what ADRA Canada did was a longer term response to the Beirut blast. With the Canadian Food Grains Bank, they were able to support families through food, which is now also a bigger issue in Lebanon.
Okay.
After the explosion. Access to food, being able to afford the high prices of food. So our project with the Canadian Food Grains Bank and ADRA Canada, we're supporting 1,063 families in Beirut who were also affected by the blast with an e-card. It's a food e-card. Okay. To a local supermarket, and they can shop their monthly food necessities on a regular basis, and now it's been 12 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is there like limits on what they can use for the e-card?
Yes, we give them a specific amount, and that amount is also determined based on the survival minimum expenditure basket.
Okay.
So we know how much it will cost, because we do it, of course, it's a whole sector, like the food security sector, and we do an analysis of how much food will cost a family per
Right.
person. So we followed those guidelines, and we know that, for example, before, when the prices were slightly lower, it almost costed 150,000 Lebanese lira per person per household. Now, because of the inflation, the prices of food are higher. So now we give 350,000 Lebanese lira per person per household.
Okay. Well, what does that work out to Canadian dollars?
It really depends.
Okay.
It's so
Yeah,
complicated.
I guess right now, like Lebanon is in such flux that probably changes almost daily or hourly, I imagine.
Exactly. It changes hourly. So there's the black market rate, there's a bank rate, then there's a second bank rate.
Okay.
But I would say that I think 350,000 lira can almost equal $20.
Okay.
Okay. Which isn't a lot for us.
Right.
But it's a lot
like
for them.
Yeah, but Yeah. In markets around the world, $20 can go a long way.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah.
And so you like top up the cards for them, or
Correct.
do you hand out
No.
cards to families, or how does that work?
They're reloaded monthly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Virtually or?
Virtually.
Okay, so they don't have to like come back to the ADRA office and top
No.
them up or anything. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
So automatically we have a day in a month that the food e-card is reloaded. In addition to the food e-cards, the Canadian Food Grain Bank also supports small to medium enterprises that were affected by the blast. So we had Don from ADRA Canada who came right after the explosion by a few months. He came and he did assessment with our meal officer, which is our monitoring and evaluation officer. They went to go visit different small businesses, example restaurants and grocery like small grocery markets that were damaged by the explosion. And who could not afford to repair the shop themselves. So they identified 32 small to medium businesses, and they, with the support of the Canadian Food Grains Bank, we were able to provide each one of them with $2,000. So $2,000 is good enough in Lebanon to help that shop repair the damages that were done, rehire employees, and provide them with some kind of income for a few months until they're able to reestablish themselves.
Okay.
And also to purchase all the supplies and food that they needed, again, to reopen.
Okay, so this is more in the rebuilding.
Exactly.
And this is an ongoing project.
So for the small businesses, it was a one-time cash assistance. Yep. But for the food e-cards, it's
that one's ongoing.
That's ongoing, and it was done for 12 months.
Okay. And are the education programs still running?
They are still running, yes.
Okay.
But as I said, that they are done remotely now.
Right.
Yeah, especially for younger children. We don't want to put them at risk of catching COVID. But we do have the retention program, the retention support program, which is with the older children, because they have exams and they struggle more with staying in school. So we bring them into the centers, but of course with maybe lower numbers than we used to.
Okay.
Yeah. So now our numbers are lower than we could take before.
Right. Which with everything else that you guys have taken on in the last year and a half. And so that's something that I wanted to talk about a little bit. So a lot of people think when a disaster happens, we go in, we help with the immediate recovery and help people get back on their feet. Things in Lebanon have been different in that, yes, we've helped people rebuild, but there has been an economic crisis that has kind of snowballed from this whole situation. If I'm not mistaken, it had sort of been rumbling in the background for a while before, and then this just kind of was the catalyst for economic collapse, would you say?
Yes.
Or, okay.
Well, I definitely think that the economy in Lebanon collapsed.
Right.
When I had arrived to Lebanon, I hadn't seen the levels of poverty that I had seen even when I lived in Syria.
Wow. And this is pre-explosion?
Exactly. Okay. In February 2019, when I had arrived in Lebanon. It was shocking to me because I lived in Syria during a civil war for 2 years. I lived in Damascus, which is the capital, but what I saw in Lebanon was different. The Lebanese lira, the currency, was $1 to 1,500 Lebanese lira. Mm-hmm. And it was pegged like that at that rate since 1997. And since then, things slowly started to deteriorate. The situation was slowly getting worse. For example, sometimes there would be no bread in the market. ATMs would be running out of money. And then sometimes fuel stations would report that they have scarcity in fuel. So all of these were small symptoms of what was coming to Lebanon. Then in October 2019, the government had announced that they were going to tax WhatsApp. This was the last straw for the people.
Okay.
You know, so they took the streets in October 2019, and I'm not sure if you saw videos of the protests. People were on the streets, they were lighting tires, and they were furious because so many things were happening, but being able to tax WhatsApp, which is, I'm sure it's not legal, then they were thinking that, like, no, like, what's going on? Something is about to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So we were all aware of it, but I think we were denying that something bad was going to happen to Lebanon, because what's happening now, we've never seen before.
Yeah.
So since October 2019, the banks all of a sudden announced that anyone who has US dollars cannot withdraw it from the bank. So even as ADRA Lebanon, having funds which are sent from abroad in US dollars, we cannot withdraw it. So even our projects, a lot of them, we had to pause them because we couldn't pay for anything. The lira started to weaken. The Lebanese lira started to weaken and went from 1,500 to 2,000, for example. And then the black market started to emerge. Okay, but the bank started putting capital control. So, for example, I couldn't withdraw my money from the bank. ADRA Lebanon couldn't. The whole country now could not withdraw their money from banks. So we started to panic. We didn't know what's happening. But then we started to notice that, okay, let's just start using the local currency, which is hard because when the black market started to emerge and the lira started to weaken, all of the suppliers and contractors, because everything in Lebanon, like 98% of everything is imported in Lebanon, they started charging at the black market rate. So slowly it went from 1,500, 2,000, 3,000, etc. Now it's at $1 to 20,000.
Wow.
Which, yeah.
That's wild inflation.
Yeah. So, but you have to keep in mind that this is the black market rate. The bank rate still uses the 1,500 rate, but no one in the country uses that. So if I'm going to buy food, the supermarket will price that food at 20,000 or whatever the daily rate is.
Okay.
So this rate changes on a daily basis.
And so like prices in grocery stores changes pretty much daily as well.
The price of food increased by 404% since October 2019.
Wow.
Yeah. So for example, just purchasing vegetables and fruits, you can no longer afford it. I know, so that's all of this is what has been even increasing the levels of poverty in Lebanon. Lebanese families who are in middle class are now in under the poverty line. Wow. Syrian refugees, going from almost 75% of Syrian refugees living under the poverty line, are now at 90%. And almost all Syrian refugees are living under the poverty line in Lebanon. There are more homeless people now. More children are engaged in child labor. Younger girls are getting married. People have lost their jobs tremendously. Like there is such a high rate of unemployment in Lebanon now that they don't know how to survive anymore. Like even our beneficiaries that we're supporting with this, the food e-cards, the food e-cards we provide them with are not even enough anymore. Because the prices change on a daily basis in the supermarket. No one can afford their basic necessities anymore. So I think that the explosion happening, it was just another addition to what was already happening in Lebanon. The people are suffering. We don't have access to water anymore. We don't have access to fuel. We don't have access to food. We're just living day by day.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't realize things were so bad there. It's unfortunate to hear,
yes.
But it's also great what ADRA is doing.
Yes.
I love that ADRA is there trying to feed people that just can't afford to even buy vegetables and fruit.
ADRA Lebanon has done a great job at responding, especially after the explosion. The day right after the explosion, it looked like as if it was the end of the world, But the team, all of the ADRA Lebanon team, and even we had immediately a team from all over the world. We had from Brazil, we had from Germany, ADRA personnel being deployed to Lebanon. Yes. They were an emergency team.
Yeah, ADRA, for our viewers and our listeners, ADRA has a program called Emergency Response Team or Emergency Response Network, where if a disaster happens, we have highly trained professionals around the world that can then go to where the disaster has happened and respond immediately.
Exactly.
So
it was amazing. I mean, at that time, I was in Canada, unfortunately, and I couldn't help. I wasn't on the ground, but my team there, they did such an excellent job on going. The next day, they were distributing water, they were distributing food, blankets, they were distributing flashlights because the electricity had gone out. And this was not only to the people who had lost their homes, but over there we have the Lebanese Red Cross, who we were also distributing to because they were the field responders.
Okay.
So we were providing them with water and with food and flashlights. So I think that just being able to respond the next day, and although they had suffered from the explosion themselves,
right,
it shows how strong they are.
Yeah, like you had mentioned that the ADRA office
Yes.
had collapsed. And
Correct.
You were there any employees in the office at the time?
Yes, we had two of my colleagues who were still in the office. That day they decided to work late. I don't know why. Right. They decided to work until 6 p.m. Past 6, and we have one colleague who actually went through the Lebanese civil war. So when she had heard the first explosion, there were two. Mm-hmm. When she had first heard the first smaller one, she knew exactly what to do. So she, my other colleague, she started panicking, but she told her to calm down and just go under a table. And she thought it was, unfortunately, she thought it was airplanes.
Like an airstrike?
Like an airstrike,
okay.
Yeah. So they went on the table, and then within seconds, our roof collapsed, all the windows in our office broke, and they didn't know how to get out. They waited until all of the smoke had gone, and then they finally just went down and left the office.
Wow. Well, I'm glad they were okay. There was no injuries.
There were no injuries, thanks to
her smartness
and her unfortunate experience with the Lebanese Civil War.
Yeah. So, but ultimately, that possibly saved her and her colleague's life.
Correct.
So that's
exactly
very, very good.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that they were both fine. Just wondering, going forward now, so we've seen basically the transformation of our projects from education with the refugees, and then the response, and now the ongoing helping people with food. So what future projects does ADRA? Yeah. What is ADRA looking like in the future going forward in Lebanon?
So I think with the ongoing crisis, especially with people not being able to afford food, I think that ADRA Lebanon is looking to respond more to this, and because food before wasn't such an issue in Lebanon, but now it's the biggest. People, the hunger levels have really increased, so I think that we want to continue providing food with people. We are looking to continue our partnership with ADRA Canada in order to be able to reach not only people who are affected by the blast, but people who are also affected by this economic crisis. Mm-hmm. So that's why we want to continue with our food distribution. Okay.
And this is our projects in partnership with Canadian Food Grains Bank.
Correct. Okay. Yes.
The Canadian Food Grains Bank has been working with ADRA Lebanon now. Has it been since the explosion or before the explosion as well?
It's been since the explosion.
Okay.
Yes. ADRA Lebanon has been working with the Canadian Food Grains Bank for 1 year now, since last October, and since the onset of as a response to the Beirut port blast.
Okay. And ongoing now into the future. Okay. Well, that was an amazing story and information. Thank you so much for sharing. Thanks for joining us today. It was great having you.
Thank you for having me here.
And if people are interested, is there a way that they can follow ADRA Lebanon?
Yeah. To keep up with the work that ADRA Lebanon is doing, they can follow us on our social media. It's just ADRA Lebanon. We are on Instagram and on Facebook. Okay,
great. So follow them on the social media accounts. Also, if you want to learn more or to donate towards projects in Lebanon, you can visit adra.ca/Lebanon. I would also like you to check out our other podcasts at adra.ca/podcast. We are also on Roku and Amazon Fire TV, so you can check us out there, as well as YouTube and Vimeo. So lots of ways to watch the ADRA Insider podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.